Sobbing openly, my colleague tried to utter something, but I wasn't listening. I pushed her aside and looked into the face of the patient. He was just a boy, about 10 years old. Without expecting to find one, I felt the boy's neck for a pulse. It was 150, much too fast, and his skin was cold to the touch. I looked at his face, dirty, blood-smeared, a crust around the mouth. Eyes almost closed. Had it not been for the tachycardic heart rhythm, I would have taken him for dead on arrival. At that moment, there had been a lull in the otherwise constant stream of incoming patients, and the ambulance men helped us get the boy into the operating theatre. We only had time for the bare essential sterilization of operating tools. The going was slippery. The blood clung to the rubber soles of my clogs, but no one had time to mop the floor. The boy's left arm had severe lesions that were bleeding profusely, and the tendons and arteries were exposed. One of my colleagues cut off what remained of the boy's clothing while I clamped the arteries in his arm and called for a blood transfusion. Instruments rattled in their sterile stainless steel bowls. The chief surgeon came, his sterilized hands raised in the air, and we got to work. Later, I read the boy's name in the newspapers. Franz. He was 10 years old. Franz had been playing behind St. Hedvigsøstrenes orphanage on Absalonsgade when their hand grenade came hurtling over the wall. 6 children were injured, including Franz, in a blast of grenade fragments. Once we started operating, it became clear the injuries to the arm and shoulder were serious, but the damage to his abdomen was much worse because the liver was perforated, practically cut in half, resulting in massive internal bleeding. It was a miracle he had made it to the hospital alive. While we did our best to save the boy, the chief surgeon suddenly lowered his sterile wound hook I had just put in his hand. I followed his gaze. The boy's face was chalk white. He was no longer with us. The rapid heart rate was gone. I felt some relief because we would never have been able to save his life. For a moment, it was as if I saw the boy's soul leaving his mangled body, circle once under the ceiling, and disappear out the window. I felt my throat constrict, but I took a firm hold on my emotions and stepped away from the operating table. I looked up at the surgeon. His face was serious, albeit almost devoid of expression. We nodded to each other, understood we had done what we could. This time, it wasn't Chief Surgeon Schmidt. It was another doctor, an elderly man called Professor Olsen, who was close to his retirement. But when all hell broke loose, he rose to the challenge, became young again, fought like a lion to save lives. Afterwards, he sank into himself, as if a wet rag. A few months later, he left the hospital. The horrors of that day had spent his final reserves. When I finally left the hospital that evening, I was so exhausted that my hands were shaking. I fumbled for my cigarettes in the breast pocket of my nurse's uniform, stood under the grey skies for a moment, filled my lungs with fresh air before lighting up. Then I slowly made my way down the street. I knew I had done everything in my power to save the patient, in the spirit of the original Nightingale pledge. That was enough. I wouldn't have nightmares about that day on the surgical ward. My ordeal lay ahead of me, so soon that I didn't finish my cigarette. I would so dearly love to say it was my fault. It might sound strange to some people, but for me, it would have made everything a little easier if I had been to blame. Part of my pain was shame, a sense of guilt. Yes, I knew a young man named Leo. Yes, I loved him. And yes, he was a soldier in the occupying forces. I didn't know that when we first met, but ignorance is no excuse. Leo was a German soldier. He wouldn't deny it, but he could hide it if he wanted to. He spoke Danish flawlessly and without the trace of a German accent. His family had lived in southern Jutland for generations, on Eltz Island and on the Jutland Peninsula, and at the dawn of time his forefathers were probably Danes. He was born in the year of the reunification of southern Jutland and northern Slesvig in 1920, so his parents belonged to the German minority in Denmark, but they counted as Danish citizens in the 1930s, when Hitler's propaganda machine agitated in southern Jutland with a vengeance.